The Animal Rescue Center, a second chance for the abandoned. The Animal Rescue Center was a place where abandoned creatures found a second chance. But for Emma, this wasn't just a job. It was the only reason she felt her life had true meaning. Every day, she and the other staff members were constantly occupied with intense rescue cases. Injured, abandoned, and mistreated animals came here as their last refuge. But not everyone at the center truly cared about them. "Why are you still standing there? Get to work. I'm not paying you to just stand and watch." Victor, the deputy director of the center, barked. He was a man who only cared about efficiency and had no compassion for animals. Emma clenched her fists. She didn't need Victor's encouragement, but his constant yelling made the atmosphere suffocating. She turned to look at her colleagues. They didn't dare to resist, fearing they would lose their jobs. But Emma was different. She wasn't here for the money. She was here for the lives that needed saving. When rescuers face a harsh challenge early that morning, the center received an emergency call. "There's a whale stranded near the shore. Its body is covered in thousands of barnacles. It needs immediate help." Emma quickly put on her rescue gear. She rushed to the dock with the team, but Victor just stood with his arms crossed. "Don't waste too much time. If that whale is too weak, don't bother," he said coldly. Emma clenched her fists. Life was not something that could be considered a waste. But she said nothing. She would let her actions speak for her. Rescue at sea, a test of patience. The ocean wind howled as they approached the stranded whale. It lay motionless on the surface, its entire body encrusted with barnacles as hard as stone, preventing it from moving. "We need to clean them off before it collapses," a staff member shouted. Emma climbed onto the whale's back, her hands trembling as she touched the thick layers of barnacles. These parasites were not only causing the creature pain, but also obstructing its breathing. "We'll get you through this," she whispered. Alongside the other staff members, she began removing the barnacles, ignoring the sting of the icy seawater against her skin. Hours passed. Barnacle by barnacle, they cleared the whale's body, but Emma could feel her strength fading. "Do you really think this is worth it?" Victor stood on the boat, arms crossed. "If it's not going to survive, don't waste your effort. It's just an animal." Emma bit her lip. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he didn't deserve to run a rescue center. But she had no time to argue with him. She had a life to save. When a small miracle happens, hours passed, but finally they had removed most of the parasites from the whale's body. Emma collapsed onto the boat deck, her breath heavy. At that moment, the whale stirred. It took a deep breath, then slowly dove into the water, its eyes shimmering as if expressing gratitude. A round of applause erupted. Everyone cheered, except Victor. He merely scoffed and turned away as if none of it mattered. Emma didn't care about him, because she knew she had just saved a life, and that meant more than anything else in the world. She watched as the whale disappeared into the deep blue ocean, a faint smile appearing on her lips. But what she didn't know was that her past was waiting for her. The tragedy of the past. One reverse turn changed everything. The sun cast faint golden rays over a quiet suburban neighborhood, where an old, modest house stood among newer, more luxurious ones. Inside that house, Emma and her mother, Helena, had fought through life's hardships together for nearly 20 years. No one knew they once had a complete family. No one knew they once had a father, because he had abandoned them before Emma was even born. Helena never spoke about the past, but Emma never forgot. She hated her father, and she despised the rich and selfish, the kind of people who only cared about themselves. But she had no idea that a small incident was about to change her life forever. A small mistake, a huge consequence. That day, Emma was driving her mother's old car down a familiar road. Beside her, Helena sat quietly, gazing out the window, lost in thought. "Are you sure you don't want to go to college?" her mother asked. Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel, avoiding her gaze. "You know we don't have the money," she murmured. Helena sighed but said nothing more. They were used to not having choices. Emma focused on driving, but as she reversed out of the parking lot, bang! The car trembled. Slightly, Emma's heart leaped into her throat. She instinctively slammed on the brakes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Oh my God!" Helena gasped. "What did you just hit?" Emma's hands trembled as she pushed open the car door and rushed outside. On the pavement, a small dog lay curled up, its tiny body shivering. Emma felt as if something had squeezed her heart. She knelt down and gently touched it. It was still breathing, but it was terrified. "We have to get it to the vet immediately," Emma said, her voice shaking with worry. But just as she was about to pick up the dog, a cold voice rang out from behind her. "What have you done?" She could never forget the fury of a powerful, wealthy, and greedy man. The sound of leather shoes striking the pavement echoed, heavy, firm, and intimidating. Howard, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, stepped out from the grand estate nearby. His eyes locked onto Emma, devoid of any emotion, only contempt and fury. He didn't look at Emma. He didn't look at Helena. He only looked at his dog. "My dog is injured?" His voice was deep and tense, like a stretched wire about to snap. Emma bit her lip, trying to remain calm. I didn't see it. I'm truly sorry." Howard narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing her, as if evaluating a mere object. "Sorry? You think a simple apology is enough?" He crouched down, inspecting the injury on the dog's leg. Just a small scratch. Nothing serious. But Howard didn't care about that. "My dog is an extremely rare, purebred breed," he said, standing up straight, his voice as sharp as a blade. "Even a single scratch can decrease its value." Emma felt a surge of anger rising within her. "What about its life?" she asked, unable to hide her frustration. Howard sneered. "Life? What matters to me is its market value." Emma clenched her fists, but before she could say anything, Howard spoke words that left her stunned. "You two need to compensate me." When poverty equals powerlessness. "Compensate?" Helena gasped. "But it's just a minor injury. We can take it to the vet." Howard cut her off. "I don't need you to decide." His gaze was firm as he stared at the two women. "If you don't pay, I'll call the police." The air froze. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "How much?" Helena whispered, already knowing that whatever number he said would be beyond their reach. Howard smirked. $5,000. Helena's breath caught, her eyes widening in disbelief. $5,000? That amount was a fortune to them. "We don't have that kind of money." Helena's voice trembled, nearly desperate, but Howard simply crossed his arms. "No money? Then I'll call the police." Emma clenched her fists, filled with helplessness and rage. She knew they had no other choice. And just then, a voice rang out. "I'll pay!" A deep, authoritative voice carried from behind. All three turned around. A sharp-eyed man stood there, Johnny Depp. Howard narrowed his eyes, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Johnny?" Johnny didn't respond. He stepped forward calmly, his gaze sweeping over Emma before locking onto Howard. Without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet and took out a stack of bills. $5,000, is that enough?" Howard stared at the money, then chuckled. "Do you think I need your money?" Johnny shrugged. "Number. But if you set a price, I assume you won't refuse." Howard remained silent for a moment, then took the money. "Fine, but I don't want to see this dog near my house again." Without a second glance at the animal, he turned and walked away. Emma stood frozen, watching Howard disappear, then turned to Johnny, her mind swirling with questions. "Who are you? And why did you help us?" Johnny knelt down, gently cradling the dog in his arms. "I don't like seeing anyone treated unfairly, and an innocent creature doesn't deserve to be abandoned." Emma didn't know what to say. She didn't trust him, but she knew she would never forget this encounter. Indeed, Johnny's kindness and a single decision changed Emma's fate. Everything seemed settled, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was incomplete. Howard had left, leaving behind an eerie emptiness. The small dog still trembled in Johnny's arms, its eyes filled with fear and pain. Emma couldn't understand. Howard had demanded $5,000 as compensation, yet once he received it, he abandoned his own pet. To Emma, this was the pinnacle of cruelty and indifference. But what puzzled her even more was Johnny's reaction. He didn't express outrage or resentment. He simply held the small creature gently in his arms, as if he was used to this kind of injustice. Helena stepped forward, her eyes filled with empathy. "Are you going to keep it?" Johnny looked up, but his gaze was fixed on Emma. "Number, but I think the two of you can." Emma froze. Johnny wanted them to adopt it? She looked at him skeptically. "Why? Don't you want to keep it?" Johnny smiled faintly, but there was something distant about that smile. "I'm not the one it needs." He placed the dog down, gently stroking its soft fur. "It needs a real home, a place where it can feel safe. I believe you two can give it that." Helena looked at Emma as if waiting for her daughter's decision. Emma pressed her lips together, her heart filled with conflicting emotions. Taking it in, she already had too many responsibilities. She had no money, no stable life. But when she looked into its fearful eyes, she knew she couldn't abandon it the way Howard did. "All right." Emma knelt down, gently cradling the dog in her arms. "From now on, you'll have a real home." She smiled softly. "Lucky, I'll call you Lucky." The small dog nestled into her embrace as if it had finally found safety. Johnny nodded approvingly, a rare warmth flickering in his eyes. A beautiful name. But Emma knew this story was far from over. A new addition to the family. In the days that followed, life for Emma and Helena slowly returned to normal. But one thing had changed. Now in their small home, they were no longer just two people. Lucky had become part of the family, bringing rare moments of laughter into their difficult days. It was no longer scared, no longer timid like when they first met. Emma felt a sense of relief watching Lucky gradually recover. But deep inside, another worry lingered. She needed a job. And somehow Johnny seemed to have realized that before she did. That day when he came to visit Lucky, he suddenly spoke. "I have an offer." Emma looked up warily. "What is it?" Johnny spoke slowly, his voice calm yet sincere. "I know you love animals, and I know you need a job." Emma narrowed her eyes, already beginning to guess where he was going with this. "So, if you want, I can help you get a job at the rescue center." The rescue center? Emma was caught off guard. She hadn't expected Johnny to suggest this. She loved animals. She wanted to help them, but she didn't want to be indebted to anyone, especially Johnny, a man she still didn't fully trust. "Why are you helping me?" Johnny wasn't surprised by her question. He simply smiled lightly, his gaze steady. "Because I think you'd be good at it, and because I don't want to see you waste your potential." Emma didn't know what to say. Should she accept? If she refused, she would still struggle to find another job, perhaps one she wouldn't even like. But if she accepted, she would owe Johnny. She hated that feeling. She didn't want to feel like she was receiving charity. But before she could decline, another voice interrupted. "Emma, you should give it a try." It was her mother. Helena placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, her gaze filled with encouragement. "This is a good opportunity. You love animals, and you can do something you truly care about." Emma pursed her lips, looking at her mother, then at Lucky. Lucky had found a home because of Johnny. Maybe Johnny was right. Maybe she should give it a try. "All right," Emma sighed, turning to Johnny. "I'll try." Johnny smiled, but this time, his smile was genuine. "Good. I'll take you to the center tomorrow." And just like that, a new door opened in Emma's life. A new beginning at the rescue center. The next morning, Johnny personally came to pick up Emma. She was still hesitant, but when the car stopped in front of the animal rescue center, she couldn't help but feel a stir of emotion. The place was busier than she had expected. Employees and volunteers bustled about, tending to abandoned, injured, or abused animals. Seeing this, Emma felt something unfamiliar. She had never seen a place like this before. Johnny led her inside, and she was immediately assigned a simple yet challenging task, caring for the weakest animals in the treatment area. Emma got to work, but it wasn't easy. The animals here didn't just need food or water. They needed attention, patience, and understanding. Some were terrified of humans. Some had been beaten. Some had almost lost their will to live. At first, Emma struggled, but then she started to learn patience. She learned how to look into their eyes and understand what they needed. And when a tiny kitten curled up in her hands for the first time, Emma knew she had chosen the right path. A harsh reality behind the good deeds. Emma entered the rescue center with excitement and hope, but she quickly realized that not everything here was as good as it seemed. Her daily work revolved around fragile, abandoned, and abused creatures. Every time she looked into their frightened eyes, she felt reassured that she had made the right choice. But among the dedicated staff, she also discovered something else, a hidden darkness lurking within the people here. Victor, a man who did not belong in an animal rescue center. This man was the deputy director of the center, yet his attitude completely contradicted everything the place stood for. He had no love for animals. He didn't care about the safety of the staff or the well-being of the helpless creatures. To him, the rescue center was nothing more than a business opportunity. Emma began noticing strange irregularities. Some rescue supplies frequently went missing without explanation. Donations never seemed to reach the right places. Senior employees seemed hesitant whenever Victor's name was mentioned, as if they had learned to stay silent to avoid trouble. At first, Emma didn't dare to speak up. She was just a new employee, a nobody in the center. But then Victor started paying attention to her. He didn't like people who asked too many questions. He didn't like those who didn't follow orders without hesitation. One day, as Emma was tending to a severely injured dog, Victor walked in. "Why are you wasting time on this one?" He jerked his chin toward the small, trembling dog. "There are other cases that should take priority." Emma lifted her head, her brows furrowed. "It was abandoned in critical condition. I can't just leave it." Victor crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. "Do you think you get to decide that here?" His eyes held an unspoken challenge, but Emma didn't back down. "I think that if we work in an animal rescue center, our duty is to save animals, not to abandon them." The room grew tense. Some of the staff stole glances at them, but no one dared to intervene. Victor smirked. "Be careful, little girl. Anyone here can be replaced." Emma clenched her fists. She realized she had become Victor's target, but she had no idea. This was only the beginning. A fateful encounter with the past. Emma had never imagined that one day she would have to face the man who had abandoned her and her mother. But fate had its own cruel sense of irony. That day, a light drizzle fell from the sky. Helena had stopped by the rescue center to bring Emma some food. She always worried that her daughter worked too hard and neglected herself. Emma was cleaning the animal enclosures when she heard her mother's voice near the front. "Hello, I'm looking for Emma." She smiled, rinsed her hands, and walked toward the reception area. But as she stepped forward, her smile instantly vanished. Helena stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Standing across from her was Victor, no longer the commanding figure he usually projected. Victor stood still, as if he had just seen a ghost from his past. Helena trembled. Is it really you?" Emma's heart pounded against her chest as she looked between them. "What's going on?" Victor swallowed hard, taking an involuntary step back, but his eyes never left Helena. "Helena, I never expected to see you here." Helena's grip on her bag tightened, her hands trembling almost uncontrollably. "She is your daughter." Victor's face went pale. The entire room seemed to sink into a deafening silence. Emma could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. This man, Victor, her father, impossible. It couldn't be true. "No!" She shook her head, feeling like the world was spinning. "He is not my father." Helena turned to look at her daughter, then back at Victor, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. "He is the man who abandoned us." Emma felt her mind go blank. Every story her mother had told her when she was little, every tear Helena had shed, every night she had worked tirelessly to raise Emma alone, and now the man responsible for all of it was standing right in front of her. She couldn't hold it in any longer. "He doesn't deserve us!" Emma's voice broke with anger. "Mom, we don't need him!" Victor opened his mouth to speak, but Emma didn't give him the chance. She spun around and stormed out into the rain. She didn't want to see him. She didn't want to hear any excuses. She didn't want to accept this cruel truth. But she knew this story wasn't over yet, because now the past had returned, and it was about to change everything. The weight of the past in a brewing storm. The atmosphere inside the rescue center had never felt heavier. Emma couldn't explain why, but she sensed that something was wrong. Whispers among the staff, suspicious glances exchanged behind her back, funds disappearing without explanation. She knew Victor was behind it all. He was ruthless, barking orders with a cold indifference, treating his subordinates with disdain. To him, animals weren't lives to be saved. They were just another way to make money. And what infuriated Emma the most was the injustice that everyone here had to endure. A late afternoon revelation. Late in the afternoon, Johnny stepped into Emma's office, holding a thick folder in his hands. He placed it on the desk, his voice low but sharp. "We have a problem." Emma frowned. She opened the file, and what she saw made her heart tighten. The center's funds had been withdrawn without clear explanations. Staff salaries had been cut. The expenses for rescued animals didn't match reality. She looked up at Johnny, her voice heavy. "Victor did this?" Johnny crossed his arms, his eyes darkening. Who else but him? Emma bit her lip, anger rising within her like a tidal wave. We can't let him keep getting away with this. The showdown. The next day, Johnny gathered all the staff in the meeting room. Victor walked in, his face cold, but Emma noticed he was more cautious than usual. Johnny sat down, his gaze burning. "Victor, do you have anything to say to me?" Victor raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms defiantly. "About what?" Johnny tossed the folder onto the table, his voice razor sharp. "About this." The room fell into silence. Victor picked up a page, skimmed through it, and his face immediately changed. "These numbers." He tried to keep his voice steady, but Emma saw the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Johnny's voice was firm. "You embezzled the center's funds. You cut staff salaries. You pocketed donation money. And worst of all, you betrayed the trust of everyone here." Victor scoffed, but his confidence had already begun to wane. "Do you have proof?" Emma clenched her fists. His shamelessness was disgusting. Johnny leaned forward, his voice like ice. "I own this center. I don't need proof." No one in the room dared to breathe. Victor clenched his fists, his face flushing with rage. But under Johnny's piercing gaze and the undeniable evidence before him, he knew the game was over. Johnny stood up, his voice calm but firm. "From this moment on, you are no longer part of this center." Victor looked around, as if hoping someone would stand by his side, but no one did. Every staff member stared at him with contempt. He had lost. A new dawn for the rescue center. The day Victor left the center, a wave of relief swept over everyone. The missing funds were restored, the employees were paid properly. The center became a place of true compassion again, no longer controlled by greed and cruelty. But for Helena, this wasn't just about punishing a corrupt man. It was also about facing the past. A father's redemption? Johnny knew the whole story and advised Emma to reach out to her father. "We need to live with forgiveness and kindness," he had said. Emma's resentment toward Victor ran deep, but in the end, she agreed. An unexpected conversation. The three of them sat across from each other, the silence in the small room stretching endlessly. No one knew how to start. Finally, it was Victor who broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness." His voice was low. "I don't deserve it." Helena let out a bitter chuckle. "Then why are you here?" Victor met her gaze. "I did wrong, but I want to make it right." Emma felt her heart waver. Her whole life she had hated this man. She had sworn never to see him again. But now the person in front of her wasn't the same cruel man from her childhood. He was someone who had lost everything. Helena still found it hard to believe his words. "You think just saying that is enough?" Victor shook his head. "Number, but I want to try." Emma felt conflicted. She despised Victor, but deep down she knew everyone deserved a chance to make amends. Johnny stood by the doorway, watching silently. He didn't say a word, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. A hope that maybe forgiveness wasn't as impossible as it seemed. When forgiveness becomes strength, Emma didn't know if she could ever forgive Victor. But for the first time, she saw him trying. And sometimes even a small effort could change everything. Helena stood up, her eyes still cautious. "I don't know if I can trust you." Victor nodded. "Then let me prove myself." Emma looked at Victor again. There was something different in his eyes. Maybe this wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a chance for the past to stop being a burden, a chance to make things right, a chance for a family to find its way back together. And with that, a door to a new beginning slowly opened. A reward for perseverance. Emma continued working at the rescue center with a newfound sense of purpose. She was no longer haunted by her past. She had learned to move forward. Johnny saw it too. One day he called her into his office. "Have you ever thought about becoming the deputy director?" he asked casually. "A life-changing opportunity." Emma was stunned. "Are you joking?" Johnny looked at her seriously. "Number, I'm not." Emma let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "I'm just a regular employee. I'm too young." Johnny leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "I used to think that too, but I was wrong." Emma remained silent. Johnny met her gaze. "You don't just work hard. You genuinely care about every life here. You don't see this as just a job. You see this place as home. And I need someone like that to help me run this center." Emma felt her heart tighten. For the first time, she truly felt valued. She had doubted herself, but Johnny had never doubted her, and that meant more than anything else. Johnny also agreed to let Victor return to the center, not as a director, but as a staff member, because despite everything, he had experience. An imperfect but real family. After Emma took on her new role, Helena and Victor slowly began to mend their relationship. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight, but they learned to accept each other. Victor was no longer the same terrible man from the past. He didn't demand anything. He simply stayed, trying to be a part of their lives, and Helena no longer avoided him. One day, Emma saw them sitting in the kitchen together, drinking tea. No arguments, no tension. Just two people who had once loved each other, trying to be friends again. Emma didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing: this family still had a chance. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but they were still a family. 1 year later, Emma stood on the balcony of the rescue center, looking down at the staff working below. Victor was there too, not as the cruel man he once was, but as someone seeking redemption. Helena had not forgiven him immediately, but she no longer hated him. And Johnny, he was still there, still the man who had changed her life. Emma walked down, searching for Johnny near the animal enclosures. She found him sitting beside a tiny abandoned puppy, gently stroking its fur. She sat down next to him. "Are you always like this?" she asked. Johnny raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Emma smiled softly. "Always putting others before yourself." Johnny chuckled, his gaze drifting into the distance. "I just think, if I can do something to make someone's day a little better, then why not?" Emma looked at him, and suddenly she understood. Happiness wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. Happiness was about what we could give, expecting nothing in return. She had once despised the wealthy, but now this wealthy man was the one she admired most. Johnny stood up, stretching. "Come on, there's still a lot of work to do." Emma smiled. She stood up and followed him, walking toward the lives that needed them. Because in the end, she had found the true meaning of her life.